In recent years, many people have come to view the church in a new way, in a way that no one expected and that no one is proud of. The cause? Child sexual abuse.
I guess it would be the reaction of most people, completely surprised, pretty disgusted, and let down. It should be something that is taken to court and criminal action taken against these people just like anybody else.
I think ministers should be held accountable for their actions, and judgments and punishments should be handed out accordingly.
That's not good. It's not good. You know, because it is a lot of things going on in the church that no one knows until after it's happened, you know, after so long. You know, it's been happening so long.
It definitely raises questions over if the right things are in place to take care of the issues. I think that they should hold them accountable like they would hold anyone else accountable.
I think it's terrible. Yeah, it's a betrayal of trust, and that's it's a pretty big issue with me.
It's very disheartening. Right now I don't go to church, so it makes me wonder, you know, even if I can bring up a child in a church, you know, even if I would want to go to church and let that child go and do things at the church unsupervised. You think that you can trust people at the church the most, and you really, through these cases, I see that you can't.
Church leaders who fail to establish safeguards for the care of children lead to this breakdown of trust.
This problem really can affect churches in one major way, and it can erode the trust that the congregation and the community have toward that church. If it brings about the loss of trust, you've lost your ministry.
We've seen a clear shift in our society. Churches used to get the benefit of the doubt, but that is no longer true.
Richard Hammer is an attorney and CPA specializing in church law. He has conducted extensive research on the problem of child sexual abuse and the church.
Community standards have changed. Churches, just like any other organization that works with children, whether it's the Boy Scouts, the YMCA, or your local school district, are being held to a higher standard of care than in the past. A failure to take those standards seriously could result in significant legal problems if an incident of child sexual abuse should occur.
One of the things that I think historically has been an issue with churches is the reluctance to be very blunt about it, and I think when things involve sexual abuse, sexual subjects, people tend to want to avoid it, and the more blunt, the more honest you can be about it, and the more upfront and open, then the better off you are.
Dr. James Cobble has been working with church leaders for over 15 years to reduce the risk of child sexual abuse.
There are some excellent prevention programs in churches today, far more than what I think most people realize. And the leaders in those churches really should be commended. But there are still too many church leaders who just don't get it. And they'll say things like, "We know everybody in our congregation," or "No one would do anything like that," or "We don't have the time or the resources to put together a prevention program." I think most people would agree that no church, no organization really, can totally prevent the problem of child sexual abuse. But if you don't make a reasonable attempt and a problem should occur, you're going to be held accountable. And none of those excuses are going to be acceptable. And in the end, really, who is it that's hurt? It's your children and your congregation.
I'm sure you will agree with me that the reputation of your church and ministry is at stake. You know, it takes a good many years to build a reputation of strength, integrity, and honor in your community, but only a moment to tear it down.
Why are churches potentially more vulnerable to this problem than some other organizations? Dr. William Tyson specializes in the treatment of criminals who have been prosecuted for child sexual abuse.
Churches are often a very open and trusting environment, but the fact is it's very clear from the history of the last 10 years that schools and churches also attract a small group, a small but significant group of people who are there for the wrong reasons, and that includes predatory pedophiles or people who have other needs being met through contact with children or through inappropriate sexual contact or predatory sexual behavior in general. So it's a reality that we have to accept.
One of the steps in reducing the risk is to remove the misconceptions we have about child molesters.
I have met a number of child molesters over the years, and what I am struck by is what really nice people they seem to be. That, you know, we have this idea of child molesters lurking in alleys with the raincoats and, hey kid, come over here type of thing, and I think that parents assume that it's somebody like that, but in fact that is more rare. It's really somebody who has developed a trusting relationship with a child who might cross that boundary. So it's really could be anybody.
I'll often hear people as they're describing why they're absolutely sure that Brother Jones couldn't have molested all those children. Is, oh, he had such a special relationship with all the children. He was so good with the kids. And everybody was always amazed at what a great way with children he had. And then they'll go on to kind of not notice that there were all sorts of warning signs that that was not a healthy or a applaudable interest in children, but in fact masked a rather sick and destructive interest in children.
People involved in law enforcement, such as Detective Karen Balmas and Parole Officer Rick Fields, understand the breadth and scope of people who molest children in churches.
We've had pastors, teachers, youth group directors, Boy Scout leaders, Sunday school teachers, and janitors from one end to the other. Basically anybody who's involved there, anybody who ever has access to the kids.
And then just your common, or not common, but your regular church-going member. We've had plenty of those.
One thing that almost all of these molesters have in common is that they are trusted.
They get in situations like that, build the trust of the adults, which of course leads to the trust of the children, and usually that's when things start to happen. We call that the grooming process, where it may not happen within a few weeks or even a few months, but just building that kind of trust between the adults and themselves, that's how they gain access to the children.
Once abuse begins, it can continue for long periods of time without being noticed.
The more serious and dangerous the offender, the more practice they will be at fading into the woodwork and not being noticed, because not being noticed is their stock in trade.
I ended up sexually abusing a minor for about 4.5 years. And then the discovery of the crime came. Basically, that discovery of that led to me going to prison. It really began as a grooming process of me preparing her for some abuse. I would plan the activities and set them up to happen. You get pretty good at planning things and setting up situations where you're alone with the minor and making sure there's nobody else around and being able to groom her even more.
And that's part of the grooming process, is to bring the child along to the point where the child is actually initiating the sexual behavior and has no awareness that this entire scenario was staged by the perpetrator.
Prevention requires understanding both the characteristics of the offenders and the characteristics of the victims.
Someone who spends a lot of time with children, isolates children, takes a special interest in troubled or needy children, but not in a kind of a general community way, but in an isolated special relationship way is what you need to be looking for. And that's regardless of who the perpetrator is.
A lot of times that's one of the problems we run into in church situations or in school situations where the adult is around the child for an extended period of time. They gain the trust of the parents, the community, their administrative people in the church or in school, and then they get close to a child, and a lot of times it's a child that may present themselves as just the perfect victim. They may not be getting a lot of attention somewhere else. They may have problems in school. They may have problems at home, and this person becomes their friend.
Sexual abuse can happen in any church, including yours. Dave was molested by his pastor when he was 11 years old.
Over a period of a couple months, I said there had been these incidents of inappropriate touch, which I didn't recognize as a prepubescent 11-year-old. But I knew I was uncomfortable with it. And he took me to, at the house where he lived, took me to a back room, which was also set up as an office, and closed and locked the door, which then proceeded to unbuckling my pants. I clearly knew at that point that something inappropriate had happened, even though I really didn't understand the sexual act. And I'll never forget the day that I went to church and I was told that he was no longer there, that he had been transferred. And I can never forget how glad I was that day. So I did not tell anybody at that point. Approximately 2 years later, when I probably started to realize the ramifications of what had actually happened, being a 13-year-old kid, the thought that never came to my mind was he now somewhere else where he was doing this to the other kids? I was just so grateful that I was safe and that was past me. I thought that was the appropriate thing to do, was to just be quiet. I was scared. I was afraid that I wouldn't be believed, and certainly embarrassed.
Abuse victims often find it difficult to tell anyone and often remain silent for years.
They may be embarrassed to come forward. They may have been coerced not to say anything by the perpetrator. They may have come to believe in some way that it's their doing. They may feel ashamed to talk about it. There could be any host of reasons why they decide not to speak up.
At this point, I know of at least 9 victims, most of those which came after me. And to think of how many kids were harmed because I wasn't able to come forward just gave me an immense sense of regret and wishing it had never happened. But I also know that I've been forgiven. I know that God's forgiven me, and I also know that the other victims will forgive me, because if anybody understands how difficult it is to tell, I know it's other victims. The part that I know is that if you're a victim of sexual abuse as a child, you've been harmed, and it can manifest itself in so many different ways. I think for me, it was maybe lack of self-esteem, eating disorders, substance abuse, and probably now, as I've gone through this process of the past 15 months, I realize probably the greatest harm that was done to me was not only the sexual abuse, but the spiritual abuse of realizing that I was never able to turn my life over to God and to trust Him completely.
Your church can reduce this risk. The first step is to screen both paid and volunteer workers. This includes using a written application, conducting reference checks, and conducting interviews.
Well, the most important aspect of a screening procedure is the application. That is the form that a worker will fill out who is going to be supervising youth within the church. And that form will ask background questions of the worker and ask for references, and it's important to check those references. And so that's a key component.
One of the main things that we do is we do a background investigation on any employee who is going to be working directly with children. And for that matter, we do a background check on every employee, whether it's ministerial, administrative, child care. All those employees, we'll do a background screen so that we'll understand what they're bringing to us in addition to their skill set. We need that information so that we can make that kind of judgment as to whether or not we're going to put our children with these adults.
Well, every employee of the church has to go through, of course, an interview process. They have to go through an application process. So we do a very thorough job of screening out an employee. We don't want to hire anybody that's got any kind of a background or history of the problem.
One of the key prevention strategies in using volunteers is the 6-month rule. Require volunteers to be members of the church for a period of time before they can volunteer to work with children. This will help ward off molesters who want quick access to children.
I think a decent interval needs to follow, 6 months maybe. Get to know that volunteer that's come in. You know, what really are their convictions? I mean, are they Christ-driven? Are their motivations such that they really want to help the children?
After screening, the second step is to train and supervise workers. An important safety precaution is to use 2 or more adult supervisors whenever possible.
In addition, we have procedures for operating of programs, like 2-adult rule, 2-adult or open door at all times. And that would involve being sure that there's always 2 people that have gone through that entire screening process present in leadership over children or minors. And then if for any reason there's only 1, a door is open. We've been sure that in all of our children rooms, the half doors have been installed or doors with windows are in place so that there's always the ability to supervise, to observe for anybody walking by to see what's going on.
Appoint workers to monitor your facilities, especially isolated areas.
People generally aren't going to do something when they think somebody else is looking.
We have heads of every department. When our school is in session, our educational director is in the school and she's walking the halls and checking the rooms and the bathrooms, and either I am there or other males to be able to check out the others. And we constantly walk the halls to make sure that there is no inappropriate activity, either on behalf of the children acting up or of adults taking part. And we actually now in the school building have an electronic locking system so that people who do not belong in the school building cannot get in.
Churches can increase supervision by creating open environments.
As you walk around campus, you will see that the exterior walls of our building are all glass. And so that allows visibility, obviously, from the outside. Our doors from the interior are half doors, and the bottom portion remains closed, of course, but the top portion typically remains open. And beside of every classroom door, we also have a glass panel, which allows visibility from our hall areas.
A third important factor is knowing how to respond if an allegation should occur.
Problems begin when church leaders fail to take allegations seriously. Failure to respond or responding inappropriately can re-victimize a person and lead to litigation.
If a child makes an allegation, there should be a report made to social services right away. That's the first thing. And if social services does not feel it's in their domain to take care of the issue, then they will then refer it on to the police.
Church leaders should not attempt to conduct their own investigation, but they do need a response plan.
So anything that happens needs to be investigated by people who can actually truly do something about it, because you don't want to take the chance that this person may escape and do something else to somebody else.
Well, our procedures spells that out very clearly. We wanted to be sure that in that policy statement that if there was a problem, that there wasn't any question, that we didn't have to scramble on the day that thing happened, wondering what to do. So it's spelled out very clearly in our policy handbook.
The children in your church, your children, deserve a safe place.
The children have to feel safe, but more importantly than feeling safe, they have to be safe.
I think the children do it for us. I think the look in the children's faces do it for us. Their excitement, their wonderment about this wonderful thing that we're telling them about, Jesus Christ, and the lessons to be learned around that the children really are the spirit around us doing this.
Your congregation and its ministry also needs to be protected.
It's a process that you will feel very, very good about when you get it finished, because you will have confidence. You'll have confidence that you've done something very positive and very proactive in trying to avoid any problems that might arise.
It's worth every effort and every bit of energy and time that it takes to set it up.
I guess the thing that I would want to point out to everyone is that the protection policies that are in place in churches today, if those had been in place in 1968, I never would have been abused. If after the first time that the church became aware that he had abused children, if he had been removed, I never would have been abused. So people need to know that these policies are not meant to make adults uncomfortable or to make them embarrassed or to feel like they're a suspect in something. These policies are a blessing, and they're meant to protect children. And I think everyone needs to embrace them for exactly what they are.